As an economist, I sometimes have to show numbers and figures because what I have to show you about Europe, unfortunately, is a little bit depressing. But after Mr. Müller-Elmau, who believes in individual responsibility and a maximum freedom, I'm completely on the same page. However, we are governed by people in Europe who don't share this vision, unfortunately. So the depressing task right now is the European economy from the point of wellness. I could be very fast and just say, send our governments and the representatives quickly to detox clinics and close them up and never let them out again. This is the state of wellness in Europe. But, and if you look at the numbers that I will show you in a minute, you will see that is actually a good or plenty of opportunities for your businesses, for your industries. So the big picture right now that I will draw, the macro picture, matters for enterprises. Usually, and I'm an entrepreneur myself, I've been in family business my entire life, but I also wear the other hat of academia and macro, and that one as an economist. So we see macroeconomics on one side, but we watch the news, we are depressed by that, but as an entrepreneur, we simply go on, we move forward. We have to make our business, we have to make payroll, we have to look at the strategies, we have to look into the future, we have to be innovative. We kind of try to forget. But those threats that are around, and they are risks actually that matter for our businesses, we need to look at. So we have the sovereign debt crisis in Europe, which is still not solved. We have skyrocketing costs for welfare. And by welfare in Europe, we talk about social security, pension, and healthcare. And as you see here, it's almost 30% in average in Western European countries. I will go into detail a little bit later, but just to give you an idea, we have lack of growth, unfortunately. Innovation and technology changes that businesses keep up with the pace, but unfortunately the elites, the so-called elites that govern us don't. We have the past versus the future, and this is where we stand when it comes to welfare. And we have big governments, of course, and political uncertainty. Europe, and keep in mind, the European Union is not Europe. Europe is much more. Europe is diversity, Europe is vibrant, Europe is growing, Europe is the next generation that we need to support. And as an entrepreneur, and you as business people, you all know the famous quote by Josef Alois Schumpeter, a late Austrian economist, who believes in creative destruction. So what is creative destruction? We learn from the past, create new things, and not continuing making the old solutions work again and again, overall, what we do in politics. So where do we stand at a global perspective when it comes to growth? The US GDP growth forecast for 2016 is 2.4%. In the NAFTA nations, we are 2.4%, India 7.5%, note, ASEAN countries 6%, Russia minus 1.8%, and Europe, we call it growth, 1.8. My home country, Austria, we are about 0.8 to 1.2 at the current state. So this is not what economists call growth. It's just, kind of surviving a little bit. There is also another point that we need to look at, which is the new G7 and the new G8. Many in Europe still have not understood that the new G8, or new G7, if you want to use it that way, is not France, Britain, Italy, Germany competing versus the US and the rest of the world. It's Europe competing versus the rest. So we have to look at this market specifically. Let me show you the next slide. This is where we stand when it comes to economic growth. and the GDP forecasts for 2016. There are only 6 countries for 2016 that will grow more than 3%. This is Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Latvia, Sweden, and Ireland. And I'm taking emphasis on that because those countries have certainly done structural reforms. Note, structural reforms in terms of health care, education system, and pension reform, which has not been done in the rest of mostly Western Europe. This is a big opportunity. The next slide that I'll show you is, here. The balanced budgets. You all know about the famous Maastricht criteria that were made long time ago when Europe started to integrate and to unite. Unfortunately, we have broken all those rules that we have imposed on ourselves. So this year, there are only 2 countries that are above 0% and have a balanced budget, and the majority of this does not. So I'm telling you that because all these data are important for investments and for investments into the future as in your businesses. If we look at the debt levels, those nations that you see here running high deficits in red, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Greece, but also Belgium. Although one has to say Belgium was very successful running for 18 months without a government, so I'm sure this is possible for many other countries. Spain will elect their president for the 3rd time within a year because they could not form a government close to Christmas. We in Austria have elections coming up. There will be elections next year in France, and there might be elections in Italy after the referendum, December 4th, no matter how it will turn out, and Renzi cannot keep his position as a prime minister. So, if we look at those numbers, what does this mean for the rest of Europe, not looking only at Britain, because Britain, we don't know if Prime Minister May or the Parliament will trigger Article 50 in March next year. There were hopes that this article would be triggered right away by Cameron when he was still Prime Minister, right after the Brexit had happened, but now it's all kicking the can down the road and not making decisions right now. The good thing about it is that businesses have long moved forward. They do not care what politicians decide. So I was at the IOD 2 weeks ago, the Institute of Directors, at their general meeting, and the general perception was, we don't care. Let the politicians do their job. We will move on. No matter our businesses are safe, we adapt. And I think this is a notion that we should simply look at. But what we need to know about Europe also is the lack of innovation in some countries. And I will show you a graph in a minute. But why is that the case? The case is because the quality and the quantity of labor are diverse. In many countries, especially in Eastern Europe, but also in parts of Southern Europe, Southwestern Europe, education levels are very bad. And the notion of young to work is not really there. And guess why? There is no incentive to work. And this is the fate or the falls of those welfare states that we have created. If you get payments by the government, note, by the government, which is actually taxpayers' money, it's enterprises' money, it's your money that you pay into those systems, which is actually forgotten. If you get those payments and you make more, if you sit home and play a little bit with your iPhone or your whatever other nice devices you have, then that's where we are heading. And this does not create productivity. And this is a big problem for Europe, the lack of productivity. But the good news is also that those countries who drive innovation, Denmark, Finland, Germany, and the Netherlands, they are the top 5. you see here. Of course, it's not all over Germany, but it's like southern Germany. And here, you know, research is best, also in Sweden and parts of south of Great Britain. So these are the driving parts of Europe in terms of innovation. But there is also a negative a chart here, which actually tells us all the negative aspects of Europe. The overboarding welfare states, the huge bureaucracies, the lack of incentives, the high tax rates that we face. So here, actually, the point of past versus the future is evident. And I already pointed out tax ratio, actually, costs for social security, social protection, again, including healthcare and pension system are 30% in average. If we look quickly at one of our favorite countries, Greece, the costs for pensions are almost twice as much, or actually, than in Ireland. There are people who get pensions who don't live anymore, but it's the system, and it has worked. I'm sorry to say, this is the fact, and this is what has happened. And the current healthcare expenditures are significantly different in all over Europe. This is the costs in detail. By the way, you can have my slides, and they will be uploaded, and you can study them in detail. But we range from low-cost countries with 7 to 8% to countries which have a high of Denmark like 34.6, France 34.2, and Netherlands 33.3%. So those are really not good news. If we look into detail on the expenditure of healthcare, this is the very yellow line is the private expenditure, and the orange line is public expenditure. So you can see how much, you know, we invest, or the public invests in that. And this is actually a big opportunity for your industries, because there is lack of private initiatives, lack of private solutions, and this is where we can start with the future. Expenditures on pension, same thing here. Oops, sorry, go back to this one. Just to keep it a while and let it sit and let it sink. Because after all, if we look at the magic numbers, 7, 28, 50, which is 7% of the world population, 28% of world GDP, and 50% of welfare expenditures. This is what we are in Europe. If we add the US, then we come up with 13, 50, 90. 13% world population, 50% of the world GDP, and 90% of the expenditure on those social security issues. So what does this mean? Let me take you one step back before we talk about investment and investing. We look at taxes. So the overall tax burden and contribution burden in the US is right now currently 26%. It used to be a bit higher. In 2000, it was 29%. In the EU right now, we are 40%, tendency growing. In China, it's currently 19%, just to give you an idea. The point that I make is, why I make this, it's the problem that we have completely forgotten tax competition. It doesn't exist in Europe. We continue with this one-size-fits-all politics, which has not helped us solve the crisis. However, we just kicked the can down the road, and no solutions have been triggered. So I would not like to depress you, really, because, I mean, you can go home into your beautiful wellness centers and spas and hotels to get back to normal. But I think it is important to see where we stand in Europe. So where are the bright lights? The bright lights are in Poland, Romania, Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Sweden, and Ireland. If we look at this from a technological and innovative perspective, we can add southern parts of Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and again Britain. There is one hidden gem, actually, that has recovered from the so-called financial crisis. This is Iceland. Iceland is back to normal, back to the numbers from before 2008, which the rest of Europe is definitely not. The US, just to give an idea, has recovered. They are 10% above the numbers from pre-crisis status, but Europe is not. So there is two more points that destroy the creativity and the rise of enterprises in Europe. These are the inflexible labor laws. And the countries like Spain, like Italy, and France suffer the most from them. So unless we unleash that, unless we allow enterprises to work, we will not see growth in these countries. There are exceptions, of course, in certain regions. Let me come to Austria. My home country, I'm a Tyrolean. I love this. The mountains, the Alps is just providing energy. And we do not need big theaters. We have the nature here for our theater. And this is what our entrepreneurs, our people who work in the business and hospitality industry are probably driven with. Because you also have to know that the average number of employees in the hospitality industry in the Tyrol is less than 9, with 80% of those enterprises. 80% of the enterprises are really small and medium-sized enterprises. And I say this for one reason, because those people are directly at the point of sale. They see what the market demands, they know what the client wants, they learn directly, and they adapt, and they are extremely flexible. And this, of course, is a big advantage. Also, Austria, and actually the Tyrol, has the highest income per capita in Austria, with 40,000 per capita overall. Only Luxembourg is higher in Europe. The average in Austria is only 38,000 euros. But what we need to also look at is the opportunities that lie ahead with the situation that we see. We have the situation of 30% in average of spending in the national budgets on social security. This cannot go on. It's definitely a no-go. So we have to look at private solutions. Governments will not sustain this problem, because there are only two solutions to fix these deficits. It's either rising taxes, which is a no-go right now, with a tax level of average 40 to 50%. This doesn't work in Europe, and growth is not here to be seen. So we have to look for alternatives. The alternatives will be public partnerships, and they are solutions where I would like to give you an example with Chile. Chile, 34 years ago, started to privatize its pension system. They started the capital-based pension system, completely gone from the pay-as-you-go system. For many in Europe, not possible, unthinkable. They did it. And it's now working in more than 30 countries in the world. It has created a lot of growth and has created worker capitalists, because people are self-responsible for their pension accounts. They know exactly how much they own, how much they can take, how much they have to contribute. And these are competing pension funds, 7 pension funds that are private. And this is something that can be done for Social Security all over Europe. We just have to have brave politicians who do it, on the one hand. And the second point is that this outsourcing of those huge costs will provide opportunity also to enterprises. A third point that I would like to mention is the incentivization of prevention measures. This is something that is not public at all, or not done in public in Europe. So this is a further opportunity to create revenues and to create also new products. After all, the work balance and health, despite the labor laws, is something that we need to look into, and the integration of wellness in everyday life is something that politicians, but especially business people, will have to push. And again, I think it's about the individualization. It's not the individualization of medicine, and it's the individualization of social security that we are looking at. This is a huge opportunity for the market. So in combination of the spa, medicine, research industry, with private-public partnerships, getting rid of governments who destroy this notion of individualism will help us. Last but not least, I would simply say growing the middle class with higher income and more opportunity to spend will help the entire industry worldwide. And of course, enterprises create jobs and not governments. And this is probably the most important thing why family businesses flourish. They make up 75% of all enterprises in the world and 60% of the world GDP and 65% of the jobs. So entrepreneurship, enterprises are the ones who are the keys. And I think we should reclaim the moral high ground of what it means to be a true entrepreneur, somebody who takes action, somebody who takes risks, who is independent, but who is in charge also for their stuff and for their people, who are true leaders. And this is something that a young industry like the wellness industry can be a leading example for the rest of the old-fashioned industries that we see in Europe. Thank you.